Greetings, everyone, once again, back to my narrative series of The Lands of Ordia, my own, I would say, upcoming fantasy series. I published the first book a few years back, and then I'll be writing the other four, well, basically whenever I have time. So, this is my narrative series, and basically how I do things is I read through each chapter like I have been so far, and at the very end of it, I'll be just kind of commenting and giving some final thoughts to the chapter and whatnot. So if you'd like to see what else has gone on in the story so far, I have made a playlist of the past 3 chapters, so go ahead and go back and listen to those if you'd like, because we are going into the next chapter, chapter 4, Unlikely Allies. So if you want to know what has gone on and basically how Jaerel and Koraven have recently escaped from the clutches of the Duun, Phantoms of the Darkness, yeah, go check it out. I would appreciate it. So, other than that, we're going to go right into the story with Chapter 4, Unlikely Allies. With a new path set in place and ambition in his heart, Jaerel snapped the reins, making Himmelkorn jolt forward, darting away from Tiradon in split seconds. The half-breed glanced back one time to look upon his guardian again, but by the time he did, the ranger had disappeared along with Beldorn. In his mind, he could see the horse and his rider sharing a quick snack of ripe apples before their daunting task of distracting the remaining phantoms. Tiradon was strong, agile, and swift with his blade, despite having a bloodline of mankind. Typically, their race was slower at handling swords, spears, and similar weapons, but something odd came across Tiradon when he swung them about, as if a strange sensation connected his palms with the hilts and leather-bound handles. Jaerel felt at ease once he had thought these details through, and, from then on, guided Himmelkorn till sunset arrived. There among the open northern plains of Corvel, he could see the forest boundaries of Kem Kor, and since their timing was unfortunate, Jaerel knew they had to enter it once midnight had arrived. He allowed Koraven to slumber for another hour, and himself for another, but the haunting images of the Duun would not escape his mind. Just as Jaerel thought, Himmelkorn trotted to the edge of the woods in the next hour, but he seemed rather tense upon approaching it, the slender trees casting ominous shadows, and from within, only the silhouettes of what looked like countless needles could be seen. Koraven peered into the night sky to see the murky clouds covering whatever light the moon or stars could cast, and whispered, "The stars have become veiled, and the moon has its face hidden. Does this darkness have no limit?" Jaerel turned his head to comfort his friend, but when Himmelkorn gave a sudden snort and a startled whinny, he snapped back to focus on whatever alerted the horse. A single figure could be seen at the first layer of the trees, hooded and cloaked in peculiar gray garments, watching the distant visitors. Jaerel could not make out any face from within, but tried to reach out with the senses. When he did, a wave of curious mystery came about his mind, as if he shared something with this man, some sort of tie, or he had met him before and had no memory of him. Dismounting, Jaerel told Koraven to stay put while he investigated, but when he looked at the figure, whatever it was, had already vanished. "Did you see that?" Jaerel asked, keeping his eye out as they trudged past the first of the trees. "There was a cloaked man standing here. He's different." "Different?" Koraven was confused, sliding to the soft soil, taking the reins in one hand. "What do you mean? Could you sense him?" "Yes. Despite his appearance, he was nowhere near evil, and his aura of presence was enormous." "Another lost Magi?" "Perhaps, yes. Our trail is through these woods, following this man. We could uncover the truth about him along the way." "Jaerel, we cannot make stops along the way," Koraven warned him, surprising the half-breed. A gnome wandering through a dark forest with no rest was quite rare, especially for ones like Koraven. "I know Magi can tempt you with great urges to explore their ways, but our mission is more important." "My dear friend," Jaerel laughed, "you do seem to continue to astonish me." "I gave my word. I will protect you till the gem and you are safe, or until the gems are used and destroyed." "Destroyed? Why would you have them destroyed?" Jaerel clutched at his pocket as he stared at his friend in disbelief. "Every evil being out there is looking for it, from what Sirvan briefly told me. If I was you, I wouldn't want some servants of the darkness on my tail, or skulking in the shadows after me every day of my life." "Yet they were forged by the beings of light and goodness. Though there are vile powers, there is also light." Koraven paused for a moment to reflect on their words. Whatever this mission may be, continued Jaerel, it will test our bodies and our minds alike. We will need each other time and time again. Jaerel twisted around to check for any unknown or known enemies, his thoughts trailing to Tiradon and his new ally Galindia. They laid down their lives instantly just to protect the gem and its owner, even if it meant facing deadly phantoms. Tiradon had saved him twice now, and Jaerel could not find a way to repay him, either through heroic deeds or even a patch of coins. He turned back with a heavy heart as he and Koraven trudged deeper into the woods, the trees becoming thicker and the air getting heavier. Shivering gusts of wind darted past their ears occasionally, giving deep chills to the bone. No chatter of animals, birds, the scurry of rodents or insects could be heard. Something wrong rested within the forest, as if it was suffering the first stage of an unusual sickness. Jaerel wondered if all the woods and the forests of the earth felt this way, and he began to have compassion on them, from the fluttering sparrows to the springing rodents to the slimy bugs. They were a part of Ordia, living and breathing, and if Jaerel to live in a poisoned world that the darkness would create, so would nature, one of the few things that kept his happiness and joy intact. He shook the dark thought away from his mind once Koraven had passed him with Himmelkorn trotting with high spirits beside him, trying to nibble off berries or delectable leaves of a bush, but was rudely interrupted by the gnome. Jaerel glanced back and forth with keen gazes of his elven eyes in search of the mysterious Magi, his ears pricking up at every sound, and his left hand resting upon the hilt of his sword, cold to the touch. He wished the crunching of Koraven's boots and the clip-clop pattern of Himmelkorn's hooves were quieter, but like the gnome said, finding this man was of no importance. Tossing his travel bag onto Himmelkorn, who gave a short snort but didn't bother the weight, Jaerel went on ahead to scout the area, coming to a steep cliff of dried mud and spiked stones. The small hill stretched from each side that Jaerel couldn't see the edges, and even though his elven eyes, the blackness of the forest was much more dominant. Koraven came up behind Jaerel with a long sigh of disappointment, realizing the trip would be much longer than he wanted. The Kem Kor Forest was one of the smaller forests of Ordia, but had hundreds of steep hills and jutting valleys. Sparkling streams and sandy shores could be spotted almost anywhere in the woods, but in Jaerel's predicament, the water was no use to him or Koraven. On the other hand, Himmelkorn happily lapped up the icy-cold currents while the two friends eventually decided to turn left around the hill, being the southernmost direction. If they felt as if they were lost, then they could simply walk south to the Tiok Road in a day's horse ride. The silent air around the frightened half-breeds felt ominous to them, as if it were going to swallow them up along with their fear. It left them in constant anxiety as each footstep seemed as loud as the Voldune's shrieks. But they could not slow their pace now as the moon rose to its full height, the time when the phantoms had the most power and were at their swiftest, both physically and mentally, if they had minds of their own. Their evil presence were an enslaved entity rather than a thinking, processing creature of ill purposes. But that thought had only made it worse for Jaerel as he bowed his head to shake it off, rubbing his forehead harshly and rolling his head in circles. Somehow, no matter how hard he tried, he could never get the Voldoon out of his head, and he feared that they would stay there until he saw them melt into nothingness before his eyes. By the time the next hour passed, Koraven had rounded the hill at last, giving an exasperated grunt while Jaerel stepped silently behind, holding the reins of Himmelkorn firmly. While the gnome took the lead, he said, "Must be 2 hours past midnight. Those ghastly things are either gone or lost." But at the loud shout of his voice, several snapping of twigs and the rustle of leaves could be heard nearby, much closer than Jaerel had thought. A gust of air caught his attention on his left side, but nothing was there when he looked. He listened for the haunting, yet familiar chatter that the phantoms made, but heard nothing of the like. More movement sounded to his right now, startling Himmelkorn that he shook his mane and reared up with fright, galloping off to escape the unknown enemy. The reins slipped out of Jaerel's hands, burning his palms with a fiery touch. Koraven yelped as he groped for the reins, only to tumble to the muddy soil. Before Jaerel could jump to aid his friend, he caught a glimpse of the new foe. A humanoid figure stood tall among the trees, its body completely black, its arms and legs resembling a bundle of branches and twigs, twisting and turning into thick knots. Its head, similar to the Voldoon, was pitch black, though these creatures had piercing red eyes, glowing faintly in the mysterious void. As it took each step, a low rumble pounded through Jaerel's and Koraven's heads, and a strange tremor was felt under the earth. The closer it approached them, the more fear was poured into their minds. These were not even close to a human. Rather, it was made out of the forest itself. Jaerel whipped out a sword, waving it with a shaking hand at the creature while Koraven took his own sword out as well, turning it in circles to find two more slowly approaching them, their fiery red eyes gazing fiercely at their prey, or so Koraven had thought of it. He wondered then if this was how nature truly felt, being hunted day by stalking predators, hiding in the shadows of the trees. The air around them turned bitterly cold till Jaerel and Koraven could see their breath. Sparkling ice formed on the blades of their swords, giving a dazzling effect, but defeating the purpose of the weapon. Koraven's breathing increased rapidly as the monsters stood several feet above the gnome, and when he studied them closer, he could see no form or shape of their own weapons. The creatures were slow in movement, but each step they took was enormous, carving irregular prints on the earth. Their hands were curved, each finger just as strange as the other. Bent, spiky, curled branches with sharpened tips seemed to almost touch the frozen grass below. "What are you?" yelled Koraven. "What do you want with us?" The creatures stopped in their tracks at the ferocity of the gnome's voice, giving a loud groaning sound, glancing at one another. Either talking or arguing, Koraven did not know. There were clicks and resounding rumblings, mixed with terrible groans, but it did not last for long. A moment of silence followed, but when Koraven thought he had stopped them, they began to advance again, never stopping their creaking sounds as their knees bent in an irregular fashion. "Leave us alone!" Koraven shouted at them, swinging his sword back and forth to scare them off. "What are you?" Jaerel asked in a more calming tone, curious at whatever they were. He lowered his sword and, in return, lowered his defenses as well. Arching its twisted arm high above Jaerel, the creature swung viciously and quite quickly at the half-breed, who managed to jump clumsily to the side, only to be tossed to the soil as a second attack exploded the earth, sending rocks, dirt, and mud darting through the air in every direction. The ambient moaning sound of the creatures mixed now with an angered ticking sound, rapid in pace, and Jaerel knew if he and Koraven could not escape their sight, they would most likely be either devoured or smashed together. Before he could make a dash, the creature gripped his body tightly, its twig-like fingers pinching his skin, squeezing tighter every second, and once Jaerel heard Koraven's struggling screams and panicked grimaces, he felt as if he had no other choice but to use the gem. Before he did, an intense glare of the tree creature and Jaerel was shared, the creature testing how weak its prey was, and Jaerel trying to wriggle his way out. With great difficulty, he slipped out the gem, placing it firmly within his palm, where the common whirl of magnificent energy swept through his body, but also was noticed by the tree. Without knowing the spell, he muttered with whatever strength he had left, "Desara, elti velpom." Upon doing so, his body slipped out in a matter of seconds, snapping the creature's fingers in half. It gave an enormous groan of pain as it stumbled backward, gripping its hand and staring at it, expecting more twigs to sprout in place of its severed tendons, which it did, but many hours later. Jaerel took no time to waste as he charged the second tree-ish figure, towering several feet above him in a blackened shape, but with the gem still in hand, the courage built inside him was bigger than his foe. Twirling his glittering sword in a circular pattern, dragging the tip across the grassy soil in the last few seconds, he pointed the blade directly to the creature's mid-arm, shouting a strong spell. "Eshur nol harus," and a miniature whirlwind came sprouting out of the blade, shattering the ice, hitting its mark, splintering the tree's arm in hundreds of broken, chipped, and snapped pieces. Koraven dropped to the ground with a painful wince, but hurried to his feet while he and Jaerel scurried away till they could no longer hear their strange enemies. Leaning against a thick stump, Jaerel caught his breath while Koraven collapsed to the ground. "I suppose," Koraven said, among scattered breathing, "that everyone and everything is out to get us." "Just a matter of us being there at the wrong moment," Jaerel guessed, keeping his eye out for anything else. "What were those things? I've never seen them here before. Do you think they were sent from that strange place in the center of the forest?" "They were," came a commanding, stern voice from behind the two friends, startling them so that they jolted backward. A figure of a man stood before them. His hood was up, and a cloak rustled briefly behind him. He had no weapons drawn, wore thick, dark garments, and had tall-strapped black boots. With an outstretched arm, he aided Jaerel and Koraven up before darting off into the forest, telling them to escape before the tree creatures could return or follow the trail. Koraven hesitated at first, twirling his head back and forth between either option. But once Jaerel had bounded off with the stranger, the gnome had no choice but to follow. As the night passed by, the two friends kept a steady pace behind the man, who led them deeper into the woods, which Koraven recognized with each landmark until they came across the center of the forest. Koraven paused, stopping Jaerel in his tracks, but when the man simply stepped through the boundaries, marked with a peculiar symbol on 2 sets of thick stumps, both Jaerel and Koraven were astounded. A shimmer of silver light bounced through the air when he went through, like an oceanic wave through the atmosphere. Sparkles of white dust covered the man until he was completely through, turning around to Jaerel and Koraven, beckoning them to come over quickly before it was too late. "No, Jaerel, I don't trust this man," said Koraven, tugging on Jaerel's sleeve, but he would not listen to his friend. With great caution and fear in their hearts, the duo stepped forward with Jaerel's hands stretching outward with the gem still in his grasp. A powerful flow of energy surged through him when he passed the invisible shield, as if an additional source of the same energy mixed with the Alumnar's remnant. Taking Koraven's hand, he pushed the gnome through, who was equally in awe once he had passed into the center, because when he did, he suddenly felt relieved, like he was totally safe here. The grass was constantly green, the coarse soil of the forest no longer existed, the trees were full of life, and the clouds above never faded the light of the moon and stars. A certain aura with specks of magic floated through the air, greeting Jaerel and Koraven with warm comfort, reminding them of Avalon and the joyful spirits of the gnomes. Somehow, the sharp blue rays cast by the moon's light made this place come alive, the trees glittering with a silver shade and the leaves glistening with cold dew. The air around them was fresh, giving the 2 friends a sense of replenishment, a new hope to fire up their hearts. By now, Jaerel had released his tight grip on the gem, slipping it back into his jacket pocket. He deemed this place safely comfortable to have the gem hidden until the man allowed them back outside the strange boundaries. He looked up ahead to the man, wondering where he exactly was taking them. The cloak Jaerel had noticed before was a deep shade of green, blending into the forestry around them. His boots were littered with dried mud and parts of tiny twigs. Black shoulder-length hair was seen flowing in a waving pattern, but not even once did he turn his head to show his face. Assuming that this man was the one he had seen before, Jaerel strode a few feet back from him, just for safety, and because Koraven constantly warned him that following strangers was not a good idea, especially in the woods. They both whipped their heads back from time to time, checking for the monstrous creatures, but the only thing they noticed was the stillness about them, a calm, soothing sense that kept them at peace. Koraven attempted to talk with the man, asking where they were going or how they even got inside the boundaries, but the man kept quiet, striding through the ankle-high grass, flowing gently in the night breeze. Jaerel's focus drifted from the man to the gem to the forest itself constantly, almost making his mind fuzzy. But suddenly he and Koraven were stopped. A familiar whinny came from within the tall stalks of the trees, and in seconds Himblecorn came trotting up to them with a happy snort, shaking his mane and whipping his tail. Not only did he still have the gem's energy within him, but the forest also seemed to move him in a youthful way. Jaerel was most glad to see the friendly steed again, as he and Koraven patted him gently and ran their fingers through his mane, which was much smoother and straighter than before. If this place was indeed magical, Jaerel could already tell, even from Himblecorn, and he wondered where the horse had gone in order to achieve such a rejuvenating appearance and spirit. Looking onward, Jaerel could see in the distance a small hut made of perfectly lined bricks at the bottom, smooth dark wood in the middle, and the roof was made of stiff leaves and straw. Dim lights of candles rested at the window frames from inside, giving off a warm orange flow, and in front of the house was a small, weather-beaten door, cracked in many places, and if one could touch it in the wrong place, they may receive a splinter or 2. A slim chimney made from hundreds of tiny stones sprouted near the back, puffing out a thin cloud of fumes. "Why are you here?" the man asked quietly, leading them closer to the hut. "Well," Jaerel paused for a moment, shuffling the gem in his pocket. "The Voldoon has been chasing us since we left Vase." "Since Vase?" repeated the man, unconvinced. Another moment of silence followed, and the man stopped in his tracks before he let them approach the door. "Slightly before Vase," Koraven admitted. "We were on a hunting trip, though we came out with nothing, save for a few pelts and herbs. Right after that, when we were leaving, these phantoms came and assaulted us. It was quite horrifying, if you ask me." "Is that all?" The man sounded more uneasy now, worrying Koraven. Jaerel looked to him with honesty then. There would be no fooling this man. Already he could see straight through Jaerel and Koraven, recognizing truth from lie, and so far the duo was not doing so well. Despite the enchanting aura that the friends had during this time, the man was somewhat wavering in their trust. Koraven was right after all, as Jaerel thought to himself. There could be no trusting in a stranger, even if he had led them away from those terrible tree creatures. But something inside Jaerel urged him to tell their tale, either by the need or want of having a safe shelter, at least for a night, or perhaps the warm embrace of the gem. "The truth is," the half-breed said, making the man turn around at last, We were on a hunting trip for the white elk, but among our last days in the forest, I found a peculiar gem, one made of a superior magic. Jaerel's voice trailed off as the man's eyes widened. For the first time, Jaerel could see his face. He had a stern expression across his stubble beard and frowning brows. His eyes were a deep blue, full of time and knowledge, and when Jaerel stood face to face with him, the same connective vibe he felt upon entering the strange land grew immensely within him. Somehow, he knew this man, but couldn't figure out where or when he did. He stood just a few inches taller than Jaerel, but he stood in a highly mature fashion, not to boast, but to show that he held his true strength within. He did not have any sort of weapon among his thick garments, nor did he have any propped up against his hut. It was rather strange, but Jaerel did not mention it. Apparently, Jaerel continued with a long sigh, this gem is of ancient origin, and the Vol'dun are tied to it. Since our discovery, it has been an odd and dangerous journey. Our destination is Maisin Rokine, and we did not want to leave the phantoms through Ovlin. The man, like Jaerel, gave a long sigh and a quiet grunt as he turned to the door, creaking as it swung open to a firelit room. The dank, dull appearance it had given from the outside turned out to be quite the opposite inside. The house was one room, as was expected, and had all the comforts of home. Tucked in the right corner was the fireplace, crackling with the warmth of the lightly smoked flames. Neatly carved stone bricks surrounded the fire, and in front of it was a lovely red sofa with the finest feather cushions. To the left of the room was a small square table with only two simply carved wooden chairs set on each end. A candlestand with 3 tall arms shone with a brilliant gold, the wax of the candles melting very slowly, but no sign of dripping could be seen on the table itself. Between the sofa and the table lay an oval-shaped carpet with many colors, which was directly in front of the door as the man led the friends inside, shutting the door behind him and latching it shut with a large wooden plank, and to Jaerel's surprise, waved his hand to perform a spell, where a thin green line fused along the doorframe, disappearing once it had reached all corners. Jaerel figured it to be some sort of protection spell, but with the boundaries this man had already put in place in the forest, it didn't seem necessary for any more additional spells. Take a seat, the man beckoned to them, and for the first time Jaerel saw this man differently. More sincere and calm, rather than the mysterious, startling figure they met in the woods. He slid off his hood, and finally, the gleam in the man's eyes dazzled the friends as he took a chair and placed it in front of the sofa. With a relieved grunt, Koraven collapsed upon the cushions while Jaerel sat solemnly next to him. The man did not say anything as both Jaerel and Koraven bent over near the fire, rubbing their hands together as the flames warmed them up. "Who are you?" Jaerel asked, staring at the man, who ran his fingers through his smooth black hair. "Why are you helping us?" "My names," he said, sitting up, "are many. Too many, I suppose, for either of you to notice or recognize. I have lived many years on this earth, and through much turmoil. In this age, though, you may call me Jalrif." "What an odd name," murmured Koraven under his breath. "Perhaps to a gnome, yes," Jalrif said, startling Koraven that he could hear him. "Why are you helping us?" repeated Jaerel, not noticing his friend's embarrassing moment. No other traveler in this day of age would aid those in danger of, well, whatever those creatures were. "Ah, yes, the Elvers. They were once mine, at some time in the past, before the darkness took over. Once the guardians of the woods, now transformed into the stalkers of the night. If it is to Maisin Rokine you go, then perhaps I was there at the right moment, at the right time. Either way, I knew your presence once you set foot into my forest. You are no longer strangers to me." Jaerel wasn't convinced. He knew this Jalrif man, or whatever he may call himself, was hiding something, or many things at that. Jaerel trusted Jalrif enough to allow both him and Koraven to sleep peacefully through the night, but not enough to tell him any more of their personal errands or purposes of travel. Before they faded to dreams, Jaerel and Koraven were offered hot tea, to which the pot and 3 cups were suddenly present at the table, though Jaerel did not see or notice any spells activated or cast. Curiously, he and the gnome took the drink slowly at first, but when the comforting, smoothing liquid rushed through their throats, their minds were at ease, and within the next hour they were both sound asleep before Jaerel could ask any more questions from the man. Koraven had dreamt of returning to Ovlin to tend his pleasant tomato and potato fields, though they were small and surrounded by a white wooden fence that reached only a few feet tall. He dreamt that twice the amount of crops was wielded that year, so much that they were crawling over the fences, and there was great celebration among all the gnomes. He and Jaerel partied long into the night, mugs of beer and ale refilled every hour, drunk clean in half the time. Their friends were there too, smiling and laughing to their heart's content. Koraven never once tossed or turned the entire night. The vision of Jaerel's dream was somewhat different than his friends', as it usually was in the first place. He dreamt of collecting all 3 gems triumphantly in his grasp, standing tall above the orcs, goblins, and all enemies of Ordia. With great swoops of his sword, which gleamed a mighty silver across the blade, he swept through the ranks upon ranks of evil hordes, including the horrid Duun, shrieking as they slunk beneath his holy weapon of pure light. Before he knew it, he was back in Ovlin with a sudden flash, where he joined Koraven in his mending of the fields, and he returned to his parents also in the guild of Golif Wavlin. There were many small parties in the guild and the gnomish community, which made Jaerel's heart so glad that he wished he had stayed in that dream forever. Unfortunately, Koraven had woke him up, who had unknowingly nudged him in his deep sleep. They had both fallen asleep in a double-sized bed in the left corner by the table, something they had not seen right away. Jaerel lifted the heavy blankets off, and the warmth went away immediately. One oval-shaped window near the sofa sent early rays of sunlight streaming through the room, where it danced across Jalrif's shady figure through the tufts of his cloak and the waves of his hair. It was just an hour past dawn, and Jaerel fought the decision whether to stay for breakfast, or if there is any, or to take off before Jalrif woke again. Answering his internal question, Jaerel noticed Jalrif ruffling for a moment, but rising to his feet in the next minute as if he forgot something. He glanced over to his visitors, startling Jaerel at the whip of his head, though the man had said nothing, as he noticed Koraven still slumbering away. Jalrif beckoned the half-breed over as he stooped to start the fire again. The ashen embers were still a bit hot from the night before. Jaerel took a careful seat on the sofa and admittedly had almost fallen asleep again, if not for the sudden voice of Jalrif, commanding and deep, even when he whispered. "You have been safe for one night," Jalrif told Jaerel, sticking a metal poker in the fireplace, shifting the logs until he deemed it almost perfect as tiny flames began to flicker from the wood. "But you mustn't stay for too long. The Duun would have guessed you have taken refuge near the King's City." The King's City, a title that Jaerel had rarely heard in the Third Age. When Maisin Rokine was originally founded, its citadels and towers gleamed in the starlight every night, peaking so high into the sky that it seemed to touch the stars. The stone walls, roofs, and peaks of the castles shimmered with the light of Flindor, like the casting of the moonlight upon a still glass lake, or so the citizens used to say. Paved with the brilliant smooth stone, the city's paths made it seem like every person who entered through the gates was important. Scores of brilliant kings and rulers were set in Maisin Rokine during the Second Age, a grand time for the city as it expanded with great joy. Many rulers of other cities, including those in the countries of Mulanti and Silmoria, visited this grand settlement, some to seek counsel from the king, and some to simply gaze upon the land's beauty. But ever since the passing of the great King Intisham, an elven lord of magnificent rule, the king's city had lost its all, and with the commands of deceitful stewards, the trust and strength of the city was more of a myth than a fact. "When must we leave?" Jaerel asked, not bothering to question the new ally of his knowledge of Maisin Rokine. "Almost at once," Jalrif answered, sitting beside him. "You may have today to rest and recover your strength, but I must ask one thing of you. How did you find this gem?" Jaerel touched his pocket, where the lump of the gem protruded at a weird angle. Very obvious that he had it in a badly positioned place. He looked at Jalrif with embarrassment, as if he could have been holding it in his palm the entire time. I'm not sure myself," Jaerel stammered, trying to recall how exactly the gem had originally called to him in the depths of the caves. "Surely you must have had a vision before the discovery," guessed Jalrif. "No, I haven't had so many dreams before my finding of the gem, honestly. It's very strange if you ask me. Not that I'm complaining about the dreams, for they show me brilliant and wonderful things, like..." Jaerel had to stop himself before more personal feelings or situations came to light. Jalrif had been waiting for Jaerel to continue, but he shrunk his shoulders once the half-breed had quieted himself. "I know you don't trust me fully," Jalrif said truthfully, "nor do most folk who come across my path. But you must also know that I am not the enemy, or that I am not sided with the enemy either. It is quite the opposite, I suppose. The enemy himself would not hide away in woods such as these, small and quaint, teeming with life and set close to the boundaries of a gnomish community." Jaerel thought for a moment, wondering why he would mention the enemy at all, but the more he swept through the man's words, he came across something odd. Jalrif had mentioned the enemy as himself. Somehow, he knew the identity of the darkness itself. You know who the darkness is? Jaerel asked, practically letting all his questions loose. Then you must know who sent the Voldoon? Jalrif sighed heavily, glancing at the rising sun through the thick canopies of the Kem Kor Forest. I am blessed and cursed with long life and extensive knowledge, Jalrif began. The darkness has fallen once, but has now risen again. I have guessed who the enemy is, but the certainty of it is faltering in my mind. Who? Who have you guessed it to be? Jaerel was striving for more strange lore of Ordia that remained unknown to him until now. I cannot say, said Jalrif, dismayed. For any accusations or blaming at this time may cause more trouble than asked for. Take the first gem to Maisin Rokine, and await for Sirvin's appearance and commands. He knows the directions and usage of the gems very well. But he had left us with Tiradon before we set out from Vase, Jaerel told him, questioning Sirvin's loyalty. If he had truly wanted to protect the gem, he would have kept near to us this whole time. Tiradon, whispered Jalrif as he recalled a long-lost name. Tiradon. Yes, the ranger, correct? He too has a separate name, though few have come across it. If Sirvin had indeed left you with the protection of this ranger, the Voldoon would have separated. You see, the Elf Lord may be physically distant from a true purpose, but he is always 2 steps ahead in his mind. He is cunning and swift, so I suggest you not be on his bad side. By the time Jaerel began to think through Sirvin's actions, Koraven had awoken with a clumsy start, shuffling through the blankets and tumbling to the floor, giving a loud grunt as he supposedly landed straight on his face. Jaerel held his breath in from laughing so hard as the gnome rolled on the floor, stammering as he rose to his feet. Well, when are we leaving? Koraven asked, rubbing his eyes. You wish to leave this humble place? Jalrif asked, Jaerel knowing it was a rather sarcastic question. Well, no, of course not, said Koraven with a long yawn. But we have an important quest to fulfill. Perhaps Sirvin or Tiradon had already reached Maisin Rokine and are waiting for us at the gates. I see persuasion would be difficult with you, Jalrif said with a short smile. Come, stay for breakfast and wander my fields if you so desire. Breakfast? Both Koraven and Jaerel said at once. Whipping their heads to the table, 3 circular plates of a shining white color were filled to the brim with magnificent food. Golden bread stuffed with the finest butter, 2 smoked sausages with the steam rising gently above, potatoes that were mashed very evenly with a puddle of rich gravy in the center, and something that Jaerel could only describe as a flattened bread with a strange sticky substance oozing from the top and down the sides, as there were 3 of them stacked nicely on one another. Koraven had never before seen these flatbreads either, as he eyed them curiously. You eat them, Jalrif told them jokingly, as both of the friends eyed them curiously. They are called what I have found most recently, pancakes. Taking a cautious dip into the pancakes, Koraven tasted it first, and when his eyes widened with great delight, Jaerel dug into his as well, while Jalrif casually took his time with his meal. In a matter of minutes, both Jaerel and Koraven had finished theirs, feeling a bit rude that they had practically stuffed their mouths full in front of their new ally. Jalrif laughed heartily, though mainly focusing on Jaerel now, as if he were trying to remember something. Just like before, the man whispered, almost inaudible that Jaerel barely made out the words, but paid little attention to them. Perhaps Jalrif hadn't had any visitors for a long time, and was recalling their last visit. Either way, Jaerel waited patiently for his host to finish his own meal, and when he did, proclaimed that he had errands to attend to that day, though he did not delve into any information about it. If Jalrif had kept quiet about it, it must have been a serious matter. He then told Jaerel and Koraven that they were free to roam the fields and edges of the boundaries, as long as they did not cross them. Most delighted, Koraven made the first move to gather small pouches used for collecting herbs, while Jaerel simply tagged along. Jalrif had suddenly disappeared before they left the house, and along with him, the plates and crumbs of the scrumptious breakfast. This man was very curious about Jaerel, but something about him made Jaerel respect him, as he had once done a great deed, but did not get any credit for it. Koraven stepped out into the open field that they had originally come from the night before, but instead of the cool blue of the moonlight, the grass glowed a brilliant gold shade, like shiny bundles of straw, rustling briefly through a slight breeze. The warmth of the sun filled Jaerel and Koraven's bodies like the running of hot soup to their stomachs, rather than a frying sensation they usually felt during the spring and summer in Ovlin. Himblegorn was stationed nearby, flicking his tail in pure joy as he munched non-stop into the thick patches of healthy green grass, and an occasional flower or two. Koraven came over and brushed over his mane and neck before returning to Jaerel, who grinned widely at their steed. Himblegorn had not only gotten the fright of his life since leaving Vase, but now also received the best meal he would ever have. Gazing at the sky, Jaerel noticed a flurry of thin clouds among the bright blueness, and a flock of thin birds swooped overhead, calling briefly to them. The forest seemed friendly as the duo approached the boundaries, the thick trunks becoming more vibrant and the leaves moving as one, their branches creaking and swaying in unison. Jaerel's eyes widened in awe as he traced his sights up the long stalks of the woods till they flurried together at the top, becoming the home of various types of birds and small critters. Apparently the center of the forest was definitely the liveliest, to which Koraven agreed, saying that he had been missing out on quite a lot. After some time of admiration, Jaerel walked along the shimmering boundaries, barely noticeable in daylight, but could still see brief waves of the strange magic. By the next hour, Jaerel led Koraven to another unexpected place. A large community of numerous colored flowers gathered in one spot at the base of the tallest oak tree either Jaerel or Koraven had ever seen. But as they looked for its leaves, it was replaced with empty branches, sticking high into the sky and in every direction elsewhere. The bark was thick, almost thicker than the metal itself, as Jaerel ran his hands over it. So many glistening hues of the flowers filled the visions of the two friends until they came across the unusual sight. One small tombstone, jutting carefully out of the soft soil. It had a rounded top to it, and had carved curled designs of vines and lilies on the side. At the very center of the stone etched one name, Ilvia, and right below it she was named the Lady of Light. A peculiar language was written below her title, though it seemed rather old. Jaerel's memory went back to the caves, where he recalled the unknown language written on the stony walls. This tombstone had the same writing, and he wondered if Jaerel knew where each of the stone was, or if he had placed the gem in the cave itself. With even more questions in mind, the mystery of the gem grew stronger in his mind, realizing how ancient these powers were. Somehow, Jalrif knew this old and forgotten language too, so he must have either studied it secretly or was at least a few thousand years old. It was impossible. Shaking the thoughts of Jalrif aside, Jaerel bent to the tombstone. Even if he didn't know who was buried there, he figured he should pay respect to them. If it laid inside Jalrif's protective lands, they must have been of great importance. He touched the cold surface, and a sudden wave of mourning came about him, like an enormous shroud of sorrow, filled every inch of his body. Whoever this Ilvia lady was, she had died a tragic death. Jaerel could sense it. Opening his palm, Jaerel whispered, Eflura. A brilliant white rose formed in his grasp, and he set it down at the base of the tombstone. When he did, 3 more roses suddenly sprouted on either side, extending their roots with vibrant green stems. Koraven grinned respectfully, patting Jaerel on his shoulder. But something happened then that Jaerel did not expect. Resting his hands on the top of the tombstone, he was immediately wrapped in a warm comfort, as if the very air around the stone and trees smothered him in a loving, soothing embrace. Within his pocket, the gems hummed in unison with Jaerel's steadily rising heartbeat, like he was anxious to meet this Ilvia figure, one way or another. Whoever she was before, Jaerel felt content in her heart during her passing, despite his guessing of a tragic death, and he closed his eyes as his own consolement met with the humble embrace. For a long moment, they stayed there, sitting in the short emerald-shaded grass, half expecting Jalrif to show up any time now. But when he did not arrive, the friends retreated back to the hut, which took a full hour to reach, which seemed rather odd to Jaerel, and even to Koraven. The forest was hardly large enough to actually be called a forest, so that an entire hour's journey would have sent them from one border of the woods to the other. Indeed, as Jaerel expected it to be, the land was enchanted. Coming across the wizard's house at last, as Koraven decided to call him, it was nearly the beginning of the evening when Jalrif had finally come back. He did not announce his return or say anything to either of them until dinner time had arrived, when he simply asked where they had gone. Koraven told them that they casually walked about, admiring the life-filled landscape and relaxed for the other portion of the day, but Jalrif was not convinced as his gaze pierced Jaerel's, who was silent at first and tried to divert his eyes from him, but he knew he could never lie to this man. "Who is Ilvia?" the half-breed asked solemnly, giving Jalrif a surprise. A long silence filled the air while Jalrif tossed with the idea of uncovering the identity of the Lady of Light. "She is a memory," he said, almost in a whisper. His eyes seemed to darken with gloom. "The pure light within her is no longer present in this world. I assume you came across her resting place." "We did," Jaerel said, regretting that he mentioned the name to him. "You needn't worry, though," Jalrif assured him. One day we all must perish, whether we are of good heart or evil. She has been at rest for some time now. And with that somber note, the rest of that night was spent mostly in silence, save for Jalrif asking if the fire was too hot or if the night breeze was too cold. Jaerel thought it was good that this was the last night here, even if the lands were protected. In places of sorrow, Jaerel did not want to be in. He had lost nothing, and so did not technically feel others' pain. He felt awkward in every situation of death, especially at funerals. That night, neither Jaerel nor Koraven had dreams, as Jaerel was waking almost every hour, or so it seemed. It dragged on until the tips of the trees were lined with the sun's golden rays. Jalrif was awake by the time the two friends were, keeping a careful eye out, but when they were both up and ready, the same breakfast as the morning before was prepared and served to them. This time, instead of rudely scarfing up their meal, they took their time so they finished all at once as the sun rose higher. "We must be going now," Koraven nudged Jaerel, glancing out the window to see the sun rising quickly. "And so you must," Jalrif agreed as all three of them stood up. "Go now with my blessing and protection. May these forests ever aid you with your quest, and may you find where you truly belong." At the last line, Jalrif looked intensely at Jaerel for a long moment, breaking his gaze once Jaerel shimmied to the door uncomfortably. Koraven was the first one out as he untied Himmelkorn from a short wooden pole right outside the door. Tying whatever packs they had tightly to the saddle, the gnome glanced at his friend in a hurried expression. With a longing to stay with Jalrif for at least another few nights, Jaerel took the reins of the steed, leading the way and turning once more to the simple home. He noticed Jalrif giving a peculiar sign to him. 3 fingers he held up, thumb, index, and middle finger like he was shaping a backwards L. Touching his forehead briefly with the 2 long fingers, he shifted them to his chest and then extended his arms so that his hand was open, pointing to Jaerel and Koraven. Wondering if this was some sort of protection spell to be cast, he kept the specific directions of the hand in mind. The Guild of Galifwavland had several spellcasters, so he had plans to interview them with any sort of hand-motioning spells. With short farewell words, the 2 friends made their way out of Jalrif's hut. As the sun rose higher in the cloudy, billowing sky, Jaerel could see the high peaks of the Kyrell ranges come closer until the thick canopies of the forest covered their view. In addition, they had reached the safe boundaries of Jalrif's land, the surface waving like a peaceful pond's shore. Taking a brief moment, Jaerel clutched the gem as he held on tightly to Himmelkorn's reins, and Koraven held on to the saddle. Once they had ventured into the wild woods again, the darkening vibe and the sensation of paranoia kicked right back into their senses as if it never left. They reached the edges of the forest by midday, only to be covered in the shadows of the mighty mountains, their tips etched with frozen ice and melting snow of the annual winter, though that season came rather swiftly in northern Zyphithia, and even more so in the north with the ice lands of Dal. Neither Jaerel nor Koraven had ventured into that desolate land before, since they were only peaks and cliffs for landmarks. No settlements had yet been made there. The Kyrell ranges were what separated the countries of Zyphithia and Dal, until it reached the shores of the Sant River. Maisin Rokine was near the edge of the mountains, built firmly into the side of one of the smaller mountainsides, named Amoglen no Solur, or in the common tongue, Sun's Peak, for each morning in the spring and summer glowed a brilliant golden flare across the city, from the tips of the citadels to the edges of the walls. The air itself seemed to lighten up, giving a wondrous, hopeful feeling to those within the gates, even under the rule of the slow, power-tempted steward of the throne. As soon as Jaerel deemed the day to be travel-worthy, he had Koraven jump to the saddle first while he sat behind him, keeping an eye out behind him as if there were any more Boldoon, or even the twisted Elbers, caught up with them. What other creatures of the darkness had a pull on, Jaerel did not know, nor did he want to. He had already thought orcs, goblins, and trolls were bad enough already. Now that he knew what other dangers might lurk in the unknown shadows of the world, his previous knowledge of enemies shrank tremendously. But he couldn't let this get the best of him as he rode on with his friend, who seemed to nod off every now and then. Jaerel did not let him rest, though, for the city was near, and he would not stop until they were safely crossing the gates. To keep Koraven up, Jaerel began to sing familiar tunes to him, ones of gnomish traditions and some of his own, and yet others that both he and Koraven matched their verses together. Even if their voices were off-pitched and terrible, their spirits were lifted, and the remainder of the afternoon faded into the evening was a time well spent. "Look!" Koraven shouted, making Jaerel jolt suddenly, his focus directly forward. There before them in the distance were the gleaming, shimmering walls of the king's city, The neatly stacked stones stood 10 feet thick and 50 feet high, with a small walking path at the top for soldiers and guards to keep watch. Five watchtowers were set on each side of the wall as it curved into a rectangular shape, mixing finally with the cliffs of Amalan-Surul. One giant steel grate was locked shut before a massive metal grate double door opened widely to the busy streets, lined with bustling shops, vendors full of vibrant fruits and homemade gifts, and above all, various sorts of people with a wide assortment of wild personalities. Above the shining wall stood the mighty citadels and towers, mostly near the castle in the center of the city. Each had a deep blue roof shingled with thick tiles and a sharp silver point where an enormous flag waved gracefully in the ever-present wind. The flag was colored the same blue as the roof and had the city's emblem in white painted neatly on it. 2 trees encircling a city's walls with its towers peeking above it. The tree's roots were beneath the wall, twisting and curling, and above the tree's branches was the moon to the left and the sun to the right. The entirety of the design was completely white, but the edges of the trees were lined with brilliant silver. Once he and Koraven were nearly a few hundred feet from the gates, a sense of relief came over them. The night was about to come, but for once in many days, that was no longer a problem. Peering to the tops of the glistening wall, Jaerel and Koraven were at ease at the side of their refuge, Maisin Rokine. All right. So, yeah, that is the end of Chapter 4, Unlikely Allies. So this one actually, I think like among all of the chapters I made in this first book of Power of Heaven, this Chapter 4 actually is the most obscure, I would say. The introduction to Jalrif, actually, this very key figure, as if you decide to read the whole series, you'll see that Jalrif has a tremendous impact into the story, but I kind of wanted to have Jalrif have this mysterious introduction to him, because there's a lot of things that has happened to him, but his boundaries in this forest was actually something that was not intended, I guess. I guess you could say. Originally, he was supposed to be just some like wanderer, and Jaerel and Koraven just kind of like come up to him at random. But I figured since Jalrif has a deep past, I pretty much started to kind of flesh out his character, and it became a much more significant key character in the series. So just something kind of cool, I guess, about that. But yeah, so basically, this whole chapter is a very strange one, I would say. But it does demonstrate how the darkness basically is poisoning all of Ordia with the tree folk. Basically, there's a bunch of tree folks that were under the servitude of Jalrif in a better nature, but with the darkness spreading with like poison, basically it kind of corrupts. It corrupts nature and stuff first. But so yeah, little things like that here and there that I like to note, and kind of going into the histories of the history of Ordia itself. So like in this chapter, it was like Maisin Rokine. You got to listen to the history of Maisin Rokine, so that was fun. One of the very first cities that was founded in Ordia. And if you'd like to know more about it, I actually made a playlist called The History of Ordia, so you can always go back for reference for that, because there's a lot of things even in the first book that goes back to the First and Second Age. So like I mentioned before, there is a lot of history that I just kind of I'll be spreading through all 5 books. So but I think all my rambling done and out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter 4. Steadily getting through the story. It'll take a while, but it'll be worth it towards the end. So once again, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you guys in the next chapter. Farewell.